Luigi, you could probably throw a dart in a dartboard and pick a date, and there would be good water stuff to talk about.
That's true. I mean, with the water morning scoops, we always have a good crowd, but this is probably the most that we have. It's a lot of people, which is a
Better
good
than
thing.
usual, but not for necessarily good reasons, right?
I guess we'll find out. Good morning, everybody. If you're just joining us, thank you. We are going to wait maybe just a couple more minutes so others can join us as well, and then we're going to start. Again, good morning, folks. If you're just joining us, thank you for joining us. We're going to wait maybe 2 more minutes and then we will start. All right, I think we are going to start. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. It's a gorgeous Tuesday morning here in our state. My name is Luigi Del Puerto. I'm the publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times. Welcome to today's Morning Scoop. There's a big challenge ahead of us posed by the expected declaration of the first ever water shortage of the Colorado River. And this morning, we will talk about our potential response to this crisis, conservation and augmentation efforts, and what ordinary Arizonans can or should do to help ensure we have a sustainable supply of water, not just in the next 20 or 50 years, but even 100 years or more. I want to thank our sponsors this morning for making this forum possible. I want to thank the Central Arizona Project for engaging with us this way. The 336-mile-long Central Arizona Project is, of course, a monument to long-term thinking in Arizona. In the early 20th century, our leaders knew the state's future depended on a water supply that was secure, stable, and renewable. They pursued that vision, and today the canal delivers Colorado River to central and southern Arizona and is the state's single largest source of water supply, serving 80% of our state's population. And here to welcome us this morning is Terry Goddard, board president of the Central Arizona Project. Terry, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Luigi, and good morning. It's great to join in welcoming everybody to the annual morning scoop discussion about Arizona water. As Luigi said, I'm Terry Goddard, and I was very recently elected the president of the CAWCD, the Central Arizona Water Conservation District, otherwise known as the CAP Board of Directors. We're a 15-member board elected from Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima counties. And as Luigi said, we supply a very large percentage of the water to those parts of Central Arizona. Water's been in the headlines, and this program is very timely. And I think that explains why so many folks have signed up for it. Just last week, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation issued its April 24-month study, which indicated a high likelihood that the Colorado River will be in a declared Tier 1 shortage beginning in 2022. This shortage will result in a substantial cut to Arizona's share of the river and to CAP specifically. And we've known that for some time, with reductions falling largely on Central Arizona's agricultural users, but not to Arizona's cities and tribes. I probably should repeat that, not to Arizona's cities and tribes. This should come as no surprise, as I hope you already know, from the time the CAP was passed by Congress in 1968, generations of Arizonans have anticipated a day of shortage and planned accordingly. We should be immensely proud of the foresight of literally generations of Arizona leaders. The recently negotiated Drought Contingency Plan, or DCP, has kept the shortage away for several more years. It probably could have happened earlier without that foresight, but we always knew the shortage was coming. You'll learn a lot more about it today. This important point, I hope you take away, is that Arizona is prepared. Arizona water managers have long understood the risks and have been planning for them for decades. The panel that we have today is the best source of detailed information about what we have to face in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. And again, thank you to the CAP. Also sponsoring this morning scoop is this Salt River Project, SRP. SRP, of course, provides reliable, affordable water and power to more than 2 million people in a 2,900 square mile service area that spans 3 Arizona counties, including most of the Phoenix metro area. SRP's water business is one of the largest rural water suppliers in our state, delivering about 800,000 acre feet of water annually to a 375 square mile service area. And SRP also manages a 13,000 square mile watershed that includes an extensive system of reservoirs, wells, canals, and irrigation laterals. And here to also welcome us is Jason Barron, Manager of State and Local Government Relations at SRP. Jason?
Thank you, Luigi. On behalf of SRP, I'd like to welcome all of our viewers today and thank the Arizona Capital Times for presenting this panel this morning. More than 100 years ago, as SRP was emerging and being founded, the questions before society were the provision of a reliable water supply, the sources of energy for what would become a thriving and booming economy. As we fast forward to today, Arizona's water management system has become more robust and has become a model for innovation and really success in water management and is recognized as such really throughout the world. Recent news in Texas and elsewhere has those issues of water reliability and energy are as important today as they were more than 100 years ago. And that in order for us to maintain the success and the trajectory that the state's been on, we need to continue to be diligent, engage in these important conversations, and move forward with that end state in mind for the state. So with that, again, Arizona Capital Times, thank you for providing this panel of the state's preeminent water managers and for continuing this opportunity for the public to learn about what it takes to make sure that we have the water resources we need to be successful as a state. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy the program.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you again to the SRP. And also, finally, I want to thank EPCOR USA for sponsoring today's morning scoop. EPCOR started 125 years ago in Edmonton, Canada, as the first municipally-owned electric utility, and 10 years later as Edmonton's water utility. Today, EPCOR is one of the largest private utilities in the Southwest. It provides clean water, wastewater, and drainage services and energy to more than 2 million customers in the United States and in Canada. I want to play this short video from EPCOR. If you can bear with me for just a second, I want to share this screen with everybody.
As a water and wastewater utility, one of the most important responsibilities we have is to maintain modern infrastructure, including wells, pump stations, storage reservoirs, piping networks, and treatment plants needed to ensure long-term system reliability for the communities we serve. At EPCOR, this means making important investments that ultimately fuel our economy and allow our communities to keep pace with growth. The Loop 303 Regional Water Reclamation Facility, in one of the fastest growing areas of Greater Phoenix, will support future residential and business growth along Loop 303 near Luke Air Force Base, serving 4,400 acres of new development. This wastewater facility has a strong sustainability component, which at build-out will recharge up to 8 million gallons of treated effluent into the ground every day. That's enough water to serve an average of 24,000 single-family homes in the Valley annually. This supports Arizona's long-term water resource management efforts and provides water for future generations. It also allows us to maintain our commitment of recycling nearly 100% of the wastewater we treat. The Luke 303 facility is a strategic part of the long-term regional planning for the growing West Valley. It will serve the communities where current or future military families live and work, as well as other residents and businesses in the region. Our investment into the local economy was made possible thanks to our partnership with Luke Air Force Base, Maricopa County, City of Glendale, and other leaders and communities in the West Valley region of Greater Phoenix. The facility was designed to comply with Luke Air Force Base requirements to maintain flight safety. We believe critical infrastructure projects like this are the foundation for economic development by creating jobs and being a catalyst for growth.
Thank you again. I want to make sure that everybody could hear it. Were you able to hear it? Perfect. Okay, awesome. Thank you again, EPCOR, for sponsoring us, for sponsoring today's Morning Scoop. I want to introduce our panel this morning. We have a great panel. Joining us is Tom Bushaski, who is the director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources. Tom, of course, has more than 30 years of experience in water management. He is responsible for managing the state's water supplies, including multiple planning and policy, regulatory and permitting programs dedicated to that mission. He serves as Arizona's principal negotiator on matters relating to the Colorado River. Tom, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Luigi. Looking forward to this panel.
Also joining us this morning is Ted Cook, who's the general manager of the Central Arizona Project. Previously, he served as deputy general manager, finance and administration, responsible for finance, accounting, risk management, supply chain and facilities management, information technology, environmental compliance, health and safety, and protective services. He joined the CAP in 1999. Ted, thank you for joining us this morning.
Glad to be here, Luigi. Thanks for the invitation.
Also joining us is Dave Roberts, who is the Associate General Manager for Water Resources at SRP. Dave, of course, has decades of experience in water resource management, water rights administration, and watershed management. He has been involved in resolving complex water issues, water resource issues, has worked with the federal government, the state of Arizona, Central Arizona Project, and various cities, towns, irrigation districts, mining companies, environmental organizations, developers, ranchers, and farmers. Dave also has years of experience in water resource contract negotiations with Indian tribes and other water resource entities and organizations. He interned at the Arizona Department of Water Resources and joined SRP in 1986. Dave, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Luigi. Pleasure to be here.
And finally, also on the panel is Doug Dunham, who is the manager of water resources for EPCOR USA. I hope I get this one right. He is a geomorphologist by training. Doug, did I get that one right?
You did. You did.
Perfect. He has, with more than 30 years of experience in the water arena, he is considered one of the foremost water resource experts in the state and in the Southwest. As water resources manager for EPCOR USA, Doug oversees water resource planning and management management for EPCOR's U.S. water resources portfolio, which spans the company's footprint across Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. He also serves as the company's water policy liaison and oversees the company's conservation-related initiatives and regulatory requirements. Prior to joining EPCOR, Doug spent his 20 years with the Arizona Department of Water Resources in various positions, including Deputy Assistant Director of the Water Management Division, where he managed the assured and adequate water supply, recharge and recovery, statewide well, and surface water programs. Doug, thank you for joining us this morning.
Happy to be here.
All right, so as I mentioned, we have a big challenge ahead of us. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation released its 24-month projections this month, anticipating the water levels at Lake Mead will fall below the critical level, which is 1,075 feet, which would mean if the conditions don't improve by, correct me if I'm wrong, by August of this year, then it would mean a first ever declaration of water shortage in the Colorado River. So I guess the broad question is, what does this mean for our state if we see this declaration actually happen? Let me start with Tom.
So Luigi, it means that the state is going to lose 512,000 acre feet of water. For context, about 3 families live on an acre foot of water per year. Almost entirely, the impact of that reduction is going to fall on Central Arizona Project water users. But we have a plan to deal with these shortages. As Terry Goddard talked about, we've been planning for these things for years. And recently, with the drought contingency plan and the intra-Arizona implementation plan that was part of that, we have an ability to partially mitigate some of the impacts on those most severely impacted the Central Arizona Project agricultural water users. We're going to lose the ability to bank some water underground or to replenish some underground water. But that's something we can deal with out into the future. The partial mitigation plan is very complicated, and many water users around the CAP service area, within the CAP service area, contributed their water resources into that plan, including EPCOR, SRP, many of the cities, to help move some of their water that will not be impacted by the shortage into the agricultural community. And there's a groundwater program that will help the agricultural community as well. So we're well situated to deal with this. The homeowner, person sitting in their home, is not going to see a reduction of water use because of this declaration that's coming. And again, it is really a very good outcome in terms of all the planning we've done all these years. And we'll be able to deal with this with some impact, but they're going to be relatively minor impacts, unless, of course, you're the agricultural community within the CAP service area.
Tell me, you mentioned the water that we're losing. The number that I'm hearing is it's about 18% of our allocation from the Colorado River. Does that sound about right?
That sounds about right. And I think maybe it's 30% of CAP or so, a little less than that maybe. So it's a significant amount. But again, we've known this was possible for a long time and have planned accordingly.
Thank you, Tom. Ted, I want to go to you. So, what does this mean for CAP and CAP users, and which CAP users are going to get hit first, if you will, and to what extent?
That's a great question, Luigi. Thank you. First, I'd like to remind everyone that in 2020 and 2021, we have been in a tier 0 reduction. We don't call that a shortage because technically the shortage starts with tier 1 that was established under the 2007 guidelines, and DCP added tier 0. But in tier 0, we have already been reduced by 192,000 acre feet for the last 2 years, and probably for 3 to 4 years before that. In Arizona, we were voluntarily contributing that amount in advance of DCP being put in place formally. So you never really get used to something like that, but it's an important point. We're not going from a 0 reduction all the way up to 512,000 acre feet. We're going from 192 up by another 320,000 acre feet up to the 512. that doesn't make it any easier that we're doing this in steps. Under the tier 0 reduction of 192,000 acre feet, the so-called other excess pool has already been eliminated. And that was water. Other excess water is water that's available after the long-term contractors and subcontractors are satisfied and the CAP ag pool was filled. And that water went to CGRD and to the water bank primarily, and some to the Bureau of Reclamation. Those folks have other supplies of water that's available to them, but it's more more expensive and more difficult to get. So it was a difficult cutback for them. And then in tier 0, there also was some reduction to the ag pool, the CAP ag pool. Under the tier 1 shortage, the additional amount that we have to take as a state, and as Tom mentioned, virtually all of that will be taken by CAP and its customers. The rest of the agricultural pool will be eliminated, and that's before mitigation, prior to mitigation. And about 2/3 of the non-Indian ag priority pool that is being used by tribes and cities will also be reduced under the tier 1 shortage. I've said before mitigation because an important component of the drought contingency plan is the fact that there is some limited period of time, as Tom mentioned, that mitigation will be provided to soften the impact. And the non-Indian ag pool will be restored to its full amount using mitigation resources, and the ag pool will be restored by about 1/3 through mitigation. And mitigation, we probably don't have time to get into all the details, but was the result of many intersector agreements by water users in Arizona to share resources and share the burden, share the cost, and in many cases sharing water in order to soften the blow for those who are the hardest hit and make sacrifices by folks who have higher priority water.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm hearing is that our agricultural pool is probably going to get hit pretty hard, but we have in place mitigation efforts, and those mitigation efforts are going to soften the blow to them. Is that a fair assumption?
That's a fair assumption, and no one would say this is easy, but it is somewhat less impactful because of the availability of mitigation, and as Tom and President Goddard both referred to, the fact that DCP allows us to know what is going to happen ahead of time based on declining lake levels and have the ability to plan for it and react to that.
Thank you. I don't want to go to Dave. Dave, what does this mean for SRP? As Tom and Ted mentioned, the bulk of the hit, if you will be to CAP users. What about for SRP? What would this declaration mean for your organization?
Well, that's a good question there, Luigi. There's no direct impact on SRP by the reduction in supply for CAP. However, it's just a reminder for all of us that we live in a desert. We live in an area that's dependent on water coming off of our mountains and watersheds that are a long distance away from where we reside. And it reminds us that we have to continue to encourage our customers and the cities who provide water to those customers and the other municipal water providers about using our water efficiently and to be mindful about conserving water. Just because we have a great economy and a great water supply, we have to be careful that we don't overuse it and that we conserve it as much as possible. So there's nothing directly with respect to SRB customers by this shortage declaration, but it is a very good reminder that we have to use water efficiently, not waste it, and to continue to educate and encourage our customers to do that.
Thanks, Dave. And Doug, I think Tom has mentioned that this doesn't impact municipal water users, residential users such as myself. Can you just reiterate that and what that means, what this declaration means for your customers, that they're not, for example, we don't anticipate, them experiencing any cutbacks in the future as a result.
Right, right. So within the CAP system, there are various levels or pools of higher priority users, and the cities and tribes, private utilities like EPCOR, we have the highest priority, the municipal industrial pool within the CAP system. So the cuts on a tier 1 do not impact that pool. But again, as Dave said, this is a reminder that there is vulnerability out there, and we need to manage our resources as wisely as possible. And we have done that. I mean, not just the efforts of EPCOR with our recharge and recovery. We have other storage partners we work with, both in through the DCP agreements, and we're working on other with other municipalities, working on projects with SRP. Et cetera. So we're looking forward into the future to continue these conservation efforts, and the state overall has been very successful with that. We are using less water today than we did in the 1950s, even with the huge increase in population and the booming economy that we have. So we've been successful. Yay, Team Arizona! But we need to keep those efforts and keep that moving forward.
Tom, I want to ask you, sir. So when we passed DCP a couple years back, there was a presumption, and I think that has always been in my mind the wrong presumption that DCP solved the problem, something like that. And so a lot of people are asking, I've had some questions saying, we passed DCP. Why are we facing a shortage now?
So Luigi, the drought contingency plan wasn't a guarantee that we'd never have a shortage. Drought contingency plan reduced the likelihood that shortages would occur, and more importantly, reduce the likelihood that shortages that were very large would occur at lower levels in Lake Mead. So the drought contingency plan has been a huge success. You already heard some of that in the comments made about the mitigation and the resources put into that mitigation pool by a variety of stakeholders. Just the collaborative element of that alone is a huge success within our state. But what the drought contingency plan also did is it incentivized additional conservation of water in Lake Mead. It also incentivized water conserved in Lake Mead to stay in Lake Mead. So since 2014 or so, when voluntary conservation started by folks like CAP, folks in California and Nevada and Mexico, there's 40 feet of conserved water in Lake Mead. We would already be in a tier 2 shortage had that water not stayed in the lake, or had DCP not incentivized that additional conservation over the last couple of years. So it's actually a huge success story. And as Ted mentioned, there's some certainty. You can look at the hydrology, you can look at where the lake levels are, and look at probabilities looking out several years, and look at how shortages might be coming, additional shortages, to be prepared for them. So while the drought contingency plan can't override Mother Nature and the hydrology, the rainfall and snow, it's what we can do to slow the reduction in Lake Mead and minimize the depth and length of the shortages, and be prepared to deal with them when they do occur.
And Ted, I want to ask you, right now we have mitigation efforts in place. We obviously have DCP in place. So internally, we have a plan that we have agreed upon how, and that plan addresses how we'll deal with a critical shortage at Lake Mead. Do we need to do more than the mitigation efforts that we already have in place, the DCP plan that we already adopted? Do you anticipate us adding more mitigation efforts or doing something extra beyond what we already have in place?
Well, that's a very complex question, Luigi, and I'm going to touch just on a few things, and I'm sure the other panelists would like to add their comments to it. So first of all, as we've heard many times this morning, we have a plan. It's a drought contingency plan, but we're not just saying, great, that plan is done. Now we can just sit back and watch as it unfolds. So I'll start with within the drought contingency plan and all the features of the plan, like having some planning certainty and mitigation and so forth. Side by side with mitigation in the drought contingency plan was something called the offset plan. So we are going to be consuming resources to provide mitigation. But there was a separate feature of the drought contingency plan in Arizona called the offset program that would put those resources that are used back. And since we stayed out of tier 1 in 2020 and 21, we did not have any mitigation. We did not have to use those resources, but the offset program was fully implemented. By the end of 2021, it will be fully implemented, and all of the water resources that we would be prepared to use for mitigation during DCP have already been replaced. And that is part of that many feet in Lake Mead that Tom referred to. That is part of the success of DCP, along with other things that we would have probably by now been in a tier 2 for a year or two already, rather than just now looking at tier 1 for the first time. So outside of the DCP, what's next? The DCP and the 2007 guidelines upon which the DCP was built are set to expire in 2026. So we are already working on the next plan. And the description of that plan is called the reconsultation. It means the reconsultation of the 2007 guidelines. So we have a plan that we're implementing, and we're also simultaneously working on the plan that needs to come out after that within Arizona, within the Colorado River Basin and the 7 basin states. The Bureau of Reclamation, tribes, NGOs, lots of other folks are already gearing up to start working on that next plan. So in addition to, I'll call it the plan of response is what the DCP is, to ongoing drought and climate change. What else are we doing? We're also continuing to focus on conservation. We can't work our way out of these climate change and drought with conservation alone, but it continues to be an important aspect. And I love the way that Tom describes this. So if you get a chance, you can ask him about why conservation is so important. And then last but not least is augmentation. We are working on ways to augment the supply, the Colorado River supply that is shrinking and that we have to use less of, with other supplies to come in and replace it. And I'll just leave my comments at that. So there's a multi-pronged thing that's going on here, not just the current plan we have, the next plan that we're working on. How do we augment our supplies, and how do we further use less of what we do have of our Colorado River supply, even after cutbacks?
So Dave, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to weigh in on the mitigation piece, if I could.
Go ahead, sir. Yes.
Is that okay? Sure.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
So while we have talked recently about mitigation under DCP, actually mitigation started many, many years ago when the state passed the statutes to allow for underground storage and recovery, and then passed what's called the Arizona Water Banking Authority. And the state and the water users and Central Arizona Project all contributed to storing water underground, and the cities began storing effluent underground. And today, more than almost 13 million acre feet of water has been stored underground. That water was stored underground as a mitigation measure to offset the impacts of reduced water deliveries from the Central Arizona Project and even from Salt River Project system. So we've been mitigating the potential effects of drought for many, many years, and reductions in Colorado River supplies. And so water has been banked, and now the plan that's going to be put in place is to recover that water when we get into a situation when we get further cuts in CAP supplies and potentially even SRP supplies, although we're in pretty good shape as of today. So I wanted to mention that mitigation started way back in the early 90s. And that's very, very important to remember. We just didn't wake up the last several years because we're getting close to a reduction in CAP supplies that we needed to start mitigating. We did it a long, long time ago.
And Dave, and just to be clear, we've banked the water, and so the next question would be, if we do need to retrieve the water, we need to have the infrastructure to actually do that, correct? And right now, we don't necessarily have the infrastructure to do that yet.
Well, we have quite a bit of infrastructure, but we could use some more. And I think what you're leading into is the SRP CAP interconnection facility that SRP and CAP are working on collectively to perhaps it would offer the opportunity for SRP to recover water from within its system and deliver that water into the CAP canal, which then can go meet the needs of CAP customers. There's quite a bit of CAP water that's been stored within SRP service territory. that facility can also take water out of our reservoir system and put it in the CAP canal. And so integrating the SRP and CAP system more fully, I mean, we have a one-way interconnection now, but if we had a bi-directional facility, that would increase our opportunities to share water supplies, to exchange water supplies, and build more resiliency in our total system, which would be a tremendous opportunity for all of the state water users. So it's something that CAP and SRP are working on today. And hopefully in the next couple of years, that facility will be a reality. And then as we address future shortages on both of our systems, we can use that facility to help us manage those supplies.
Right now, just to be clear, go ahead, Tom, go ahead, sir.
I wanted to add, Luigi, into the idea of leveraging existing infrastructure. The legislature this year passed, and the governor just signed legislation that would allow the water bank to assign those recovery credits, those underground storage credits, to the end user, municipal or industrial end user, so that they can use their own existing well infrastructure to recover that water. That's a step forward that came out of the DCP discussions. Otherwise, the recovery agent for the water bank is TED, it's CAP. So this will save CAP money, will save their customers money. And it's a prime example of thinking outside the box and leveraging the existing infrastructure that's already in place and using it to its maximum effectiveness.
Thank you for that context, Tom. And Dave, just real quick, right now, CAP can share water with SRP, but not the other way around.
From a direct standpoint, that's true. Indirectly, we can share water by moving water from our system to CAP customers, but it would be better to be able to move that water into the CAP canal.
Perfect. And so I'm looking at other states, and in other states, they're considering implementing what to Arizona and probably a lot of people will be quite radical conservation efforts. And when we say radical, I mean it technically. They're drastic in nature. For example, Nevada is considering outlawing ornamental grass, for example. In the past, I know that California also had some, had implemented cutbacks, for example. And Doug, I want to ask you, do you anticipate Arizona, adopting any of these, as I mentioned, kind of drastic measures in the face of this shortage?
Yeah, Luigi, if I could jump back just a second on the infrastructure side of things. So, for example, not only are the SRP and CAP systems connected, but the end users. So the cities and the private utilities like EPCOR, we have interconnections with each other. So, we have a pretty robust well field. We can exercise those wells and help move water, help recover water, and move it to entities that may have more restrictions. We also have experience, for example, in Texas. We've constructed and stood up a large pipeline that has run for many miles in Texas within a year, and we're delivering water to the Austin area. So, there is infrastructure expertise. There's capital out there to be able to stand these projects up and begin them in a fairly short order. So, as far as getting that infrastructure, there's options for us out there to really continue that interconnect. So back to your question on direct shortages for the end users, with all of the robust planning that we've been doing and all of the storage that we've had been conducting for years, we've got a real robust supply of backup after backup. So I don't actually see a direct impact to end users for quite a while. Now, never say never. We could get there, but there's one of the things that I always like to point out is if you compare the approach Arizona's taken to some other states, with utilities, there is a constant effort 24/7 behind the scenes on conservation. We reduce our system losses. We have outreach programs and rebate programs for retrofitting appliances, faucets, and those kinds of things within the homes, try to continue to reduce and make water use the most efficient. In a lot of cases, there isn't a secondary backup supply for a lot of other users in other states. So when they get into a shortage, their only reaction, the only thing they can do is go to that reduce at the end user. We've got a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of supply that is still, being able to be stored, that's not going directly to the end user. So there's a lot of flexibility in our supplies that we're not up against the wall. And so I think it's going to be quite a while before we get to that type of residential end user restrictions.
So, Luke,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Tom.
So I want to jump in, and your question specifically about Nevada, Luigi. So Nevada's done a lot of great things over the years. Southern Nevada Water Authority, Las Vegas, has had a program to pay people $1 per square foot to take their grass out. This legislation is not limiting residential users from having grass in their houses. It does not do that. It's more about commercial and other things. One of the things it does, it would ban turf in rights of way, for example. So along the freeway in the middle of a street, Arizona has had that ban in place since the 1980s. So we've done many of the things that Nevada is contemplating doing legislatively because of the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. Nevada's done some additional things like their Cash for Grass program in Las Vegas. And there are lots of reasons why Nevada did that in the 2000s. They were having challenges living within their Colorado River apportionment without any shortages. So we're in a different situation. But each state and potentially even each water provider, each city has their own unique circumstances. And in Arizona, we've tailored the programs for those unique circumstances, and what makes sense in one place might not make sense in another. We do have statewide restrictions like the no grass in the right of way, only low water using plants. So one of the things that is really positive about the collaboration between the states is we support and give each other room to do the things what's best, what is the best for their state and vice versa. And that's part of how we got to the complicated drought contingency plan being approved and agreed upon among multiple states.
I'm hearing we're at tier 1 because we did some, we started banking water or conserving water in Lake Mead. We did all of these things. Otherwise, we would be at tier 2. What that tells me is that with the drought conditions that we have, with snow peaks, probably not as abundant as they were in the past, we're gonna continue to see, our Colorado River supply dwindle, which means, and everybody knows this one, we have to look at our infrastructure system and figure out ways to help each other, but also really find new sources of water. And I want to go to Ted, because Ted, the idea of desalination, maybe 10, 15 years ago, may not have it might be too cost prohibitive. It may be, for lack of a better phrase, maybe some sort of a pipe dream, but you are right now actually seriously considering it. Tell us about where you're at with, potentially, with a large scale desal program.
Well, sure. I'd love to make a couple of comments about that. And Tom, of course, is the United States chair on the binational team that is exploring desalination in Mexico. So Arizona does not have an ocean. I think that's probably everybody in the room understands that. Hopefully so. And so, but we do
only
have,
if we could, right? Only if we could, then
yeah. But they're close. But they're close to us. We don't have our own, but they're close to us. And despite the fact that we always could use more infrastructure and better infrastructure, as Dave mentioned earlier, we have fantastic infrastructure already. And so those two factors put together means that that Arizona's future almost certainly will include desalination and taking water from those desalination plants, whether they might be in the Sea of Cortez or on the coast of California, not via pipelines, even though that could happen, but via exchange. So someone locally, say in Mexico or in California, would utilize the water from a desalination facility locally and exchange some of the Colorado River water that they otherwise would be entitled to take. And that water could be taken elsewhere, like by Nevada or by Arizona through exchange. That doesn't mean necessarily that we should say, well, desalination is the future and let's just focus on that. There are other things that we can continue to do in the meantime that we've discussed this morning. That water is very expensive because it basically is finished water. It goes from ocean to finished water that you can drink. And it's not always used for those purposes. For instance, just looking at the narrow microcosm of CAP and these cutbacks that we're discussing under Tier 1, it is reducing the CAP ag pool. Well, that desalinated water would be extremely expensive for those farmers and probably cost prohibitive for them. But there's lots of intricacies and lots of levels of prioritization and water and types of water users in Arizona and in the basin that by the time those supplies become available to us, I'm talking about desalination supplies, I believe that we will have figured out a way to pay for it and to reformulate within the existing contracts and priority system how water is used in Arizona and in the lower basin to take advantage of that resource that's out there. Yes, money is an issue. Yes, affordability is an issue, but we are very creative and I believe that we will find a way to use that supply.
So the idea then, and just really quickly, the idea then is that if California, for example, created infrastructure for desal, what happens then is we'll pay them and in exchange for, as a result of our payment, they'll take less water from the Colorado River, and then we'll do an exchange, something like that, right? Did I get that one correct?
That's exactly how that would work. That's
right.
Exactly how it works.
So Dave, I know that SRP is doing a ton of things on the conservation and augmentation front, but one of the things that you're looking at is perhaps widening one of your dams. And the reason for that is there's spillage right now. If you can, in fact, capture that water, then you'll have more water to bank and more water to share. Can you tell us about it?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Luigi. Yes, what you're talking about is a result of some work that we're doing with the Bureau of Reclamation to look at the sedimentation issue that we have that's reducing capacity in our uppermost reservoir on the Verde River, Horseshoe Reservoir. So we've lost about a third of the capacity there. And so as a result, and historically, the Verde River has spilled quite a bit of water at different times throughout its entire history. So our facilities on that system have never been large enough to capture all of the water that comes off that system. And so one of the options that's being looked at as a mitigation measure to offset that loss in capacity would be to potentially expand the size of Bartlett Dam, which is the next dam downstream. Currently, Bartlett holds about 178,000 acre feet. But the research that's being done right now as part of an appraisal study is to potentially expand that and maybe even triple the size of that capacity. One, to mitigate the loss of capacity at Horseshoe, but also potentially to expand the capacity, utilize that supply for areas outside of Salt River Project to offset groundwater pumping that those entities are doing, and to create a more robust supply on the Verde River system, or at least the opportunity to capture that supply off the Verde River system, which has always been sort of the lesser amount of storage overall relative to the size of that watershed. So it's a great opportunity, I think, that we need to look at and working with the Bureau of Reclamation on that project. And hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have a completed appraisal study, which will hopefully recommend further research, perhaps in a feasibility study, to look at the most cost-effective way of addressing that sedimentation issue.
Doug, I want to go to you real quick because you mentioned that, if you look at our water use in Arizona, for example, it's actually been either pretty steady or, going down a little bit compared to what we were using, decades ago. And, what the charts that I've seen really show that residential water use, for example, has been really steady, even with a growing population. But I want to ask you, because I know that EPCOR USA has has several projects, for example, wastewater, the video that we just watched, if you can talk about that, but also, for residential users such as I am, such as me, what can we do?
Yeah, so we've got several projects that we are initializing. We have existing recharge facilities that are associated with our reclaimed water use. We do both, direct water use. So a lot of the landscaping and things like that are using the reclaimed water. And then we also recharge that. It's highly polished reclaimed water, and that is being recharged into the aquifer. We're enhancing those projects to get more water in the ground to try to increase that efficiency. And so that's a great way to stretch your supply. You're using it over and over. We also have, as I think I mentioned earlier, direct outreach to customers. We have, demonstration gardens where you can actually go out and see what these desert landscaping, xeriscaping looks like. Get advice on how to do that. We hold classes for people to kind of master how to program your irrigation programmers to water most efficiently, not overwater the low water use plants, and how to maintain that landscaping. It's really low water use, but it's the Sonoran Desert, and we can have really lush looking landscaping with these types of planting. And again, we will come out and do audits on your house, your watering, and help you look for potential leaks. So there's a great deal of outreach on the individual customer level that we conduct.
That makes me think about the fact that just a short anecdote here. My wife has been wanting me to renovate our backyard, and right now it's really ugly, and she's been kind of breathing down my neck the last couple of years or so, and so we are seriously considering renovating our backyard. And one of the things we kind of considered was trees, and right now I'm really thinking about the kind of backyard that would use the least amount of water, and this discussion just kind of reinforces that. We have a lot of questions from our viewers and our listeners. I want to spend a bit of time just going through that, so let me start asking those questions. Has the Department of Water Resources recommended residential and business water usage restrictions? If not, why not? And Tom, I think this question is for you.
Luigi, there was quite a bit of an echo. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so has the Department of Water Resources recommended residential and business water usage restrictions? If not, why not?
So under the regulatory programs of the 1980 Groundwater Management Act, we do have limits on water use for municipal, industrial, and agricultural sectors. So those limits are out there. It's up to the end user. If it's a city, the city has to be in compliance, and they work with their residents to figure out how they get in compliance, stay in compliance, and what programs will get them there. So yes, we've recommended conservation related restrictions, if you want to call it that, but it's something very different than curtailment. So when you have a shortage that is hitting you, and it's anticipated to be a short length of time, and you can't meet your demand, that's curtailment. We have not asked for any curtailment orders from any of the cities. All the cities have municipalities, municipal water providers have drought management plans, and they could enact those drought management plans because of this reduction, I believe, in Colorado River water. And in some cases, they might want to do that even though they do not have issues with meeting their demand. In 2004, when Dave's SRP cut their allocation below their normal allocation, the city of Phoenix went to stage 1 of its drought plan, which was to cut city government use by 5%. We did some optical things like shutting off fountains. So when somebody drove by and said, why is that fountain next to City Hall not on? They might think twice and say, oh, it's because there's a water issue going on. the city did not allow its city golf courses to plant winter grass in the fairways. They did in the greens and on the tee boxes. But again, another very visible sign to the public that there's a water issue going on there. And some cities may choose to voluntarily do that next year when this reduction kicks in. But in terms of curtailment orders like we had in California in 2015, for example, where the governor got on TV and said, don't shower every day. That's not in our future here with this shortage that's coming.
Thank you, Tom. Here's a question from Doran. And here's a question. To what extent are you discussing making better use of treated effluent, whether for agriculture, irrigation, or groundwater recharge? In fact, I want to go even further and ask, what about really treating effluent, from gray to tap water? And Dave, we talked about this one during our prep call a few days ago. What are your thoughts?
Well, as we talked about before, Luigi, effluent is going to be an increasingly more important supply for the valley as we go forward. Doug talked about some of the work, and the video actually showed some of the work that EPCOR is doing with effluent. But one of the things I wanted to highlight was the city of Goodyear and the work that they are doing. They are in the process of building a new water treatment plant to treat Central Arizona Project water for distribution to their customers. And they are building that plant right next door to their wastewater treatment plant. And if you talk to the city water managers over in Goodyear, they will tell you that the long-term plan potentially is to perhaps take that effluent from the wastewater plant, which is right next to the water treatment plant, treat that wastewater to a very high quality, and then retreat it again by putting it into the water treatment facility, the potable water treatment facility, and utilizing that as a potential supply in Goodyear. Again, another mitigation measure to offset the impacts of drought on Colorado River supplies. So I think it's a great opportunity. I think you'll see more cities and more municipalities looking to do that, either directly like Goodyear is doing, or indirectly like EPCOR is doing, where you recharge it and recover it. But effluent is an increasingly important supply to offset the impacts of reductions in surface flows that we get either from our system or from the Colorado.
So Luigi, I wanted to add in terms of the forward look that we've talked about so often, the Department of Environment. Department of Environmental Quality that regulates that reuse of effluent a couple of years ago went through a public process to put rules in place to allow for direct potable reuse. So again, we're always thinking ahead, having those right regulatory programs to ensure the safety of that effluent. So what Dave described with Goodyear is teed up already under state law and under the rulemaking process done by the Department of Environmental Quality.
Luigi, real quick too. One thing that we are looking at is that we have a lot of industrial users, and so we're looking at right now. We're directing some of this highly treated reclaimed water to those industrial uses instead of direct use of the potable supply. So they're using it in their manufacturing process as well as cooling needs for those facilities. And then I'd like to remind everybody, the Palo Verde plant itself is 100% cooled with reclaimed water. And so it's the largest facility in the country that is 100% supported by reclaimed cooling. So there's a lot of uses for reclaim, and that's going to continue to expand in the future.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Tom. I think here's a question for Ted, and it's from Connie. Can you elaborate on CAGRD, water reduction in a tier 1 situation, and given the concerns we have with having to buy water in the market where it's being traded as a commodity? Can you comment on this one, sir?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, CAGRD, along with the Arizona Water Banking Authority and certain uses for firming by the Bureau of Reclamation were reduced because excess water that had previously been available to them is no longer available under the DCP reductions. But as I also mentioned, those users do have other sources of water available to them. But as I said, those are more difficult to obtain and also more expensive. There's no getting around the fact that those supplies are more expensive. Specifically with respect to CAGRD, currently has a very diversified portfolio of water supplies, including wet surface water from CWCD, and is about to receive another significant amount of non-Indian ag priority water that will be taken into its portfolio. That water, of course, will be subject to shortage, but CAGRD also has many tens of thousands of acre feet of long-term storage credits that have already been stored in the ground, largely due to some recent transactions with the Gila River Indian community, and basically has enough water supply right now to last another 20 to 30 years of its current replenishment obligation. Of course, number one, that obligation will grow. And number two, additional supplies. We're not going to stop just because we have some for a long period of time. Not going to stop, and we will continue to pursue the increasingly expensive supplies. And our intention is that when the next 10 or 20 or 30 years is elapsed and we're there, we are in a similar situation, despite the cost, to have acquired significant supplies to allow CAGRD to continue to fulfill its role into the future, not hand to mouth, not, oh, just in time. That doesn't work for CAGRD.
Thank you. And I think we have room for just one more question. I'm going to ask Dave this question because we talked about this one. This is one idea that a lot of people think may have some merit, although it's going to be painful to residential water users to begin with. But what do you make of the fact? What do you think of the idea of really raising water rates as a means to drive more efficient use of water and, to a certain extent, discourage wasteful use of water?
Well, I think it's certainly, Luigi, part of the solution. It's not the entire solution, but certainly water prices at different communities are different because of their source water supply. So within the Salt River Project area, because of the way Salt River Project was set up, those prices are a little bit lower than they would be in other places. The other thing is our system is a gravity-fed system that was paid for long ago. And we simply are in the operation of maintaining that particular system. But I think pricing water to its value is something that's very, very critical going forward. And I can imagine, because we're going to be employing more expensive supplies eventually, like the desalinated water, that water prices are going to have to go up in order to be able to afford those types of supplies. So we have to be mindful of that as we go forward. Integrating a $200 water supply into our system is fairly simple relative to the use of that water, but integrating a $2,000 per acre foot water supply is going to be much more challenging for us. So water prices will have to go up, and that'll be reflective of just the cost of that supply, the acquisition of that supply going forward.
And finally, go ahead, sir.
Just a couple of comments on that. So Dave is right, and he didn't use these exact words, but part of this perception that the cost of water ought to go up to send a signal and reduce some of the lower value uses. He didn't say this, but a lot of that will take care of itself. As the supply shrinks, as the Colorado River supply shrinks, certainly in 2022, if we're in a tier 1, the price is going to go up just because the cost doesn't go down just because you're delivering less water. The unit cost goes up. And as Dave said, acquiring these higher cost replacement supplies will also drive the cost up. One point that I would like to add, though, is that the value of the water that is delivered and is being used is not always for what are viewed as a zero value or low value things like watering grass in the median of a highway and things like that. They are there for things like building chip fab plants or even bottled water and things like that people say, why are they doing that? It's of great value. And so this balance has to be achieved. And it is, as Tom said earlier, it is the up to the discretion of the contract holder whether or not that use of water is of sufficient value. the value of water when it's deployed is many, many times, hundreds of times more of value than the cost of acquiring that water in most cases. And that will continue to be forward in the future. So we shouldn't lightly dismiss the fact that, not using water is always the preferable thing. Sometimes using water is an extremely valuable thing. We have to seek that balance of sustaining, preserving, conserving, and also using for adding economic value to our communities.
If I could real quick, Luigi.
Just real quick, yeah, we're almost out of time.
A real world example is our experience in Texas right now. We are selling water in Texas for over $1,700 an acre foot, and in the Austin area, and we're not seeing people jump out of their windows. So it is economically viable to make higher and better use of these more expensive supplies.
And thank you again, Ted, Doug, Dave, and Tom. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I want to thank again the Central Arizona Project, SRP, and EPCOR USA for sponsoring this program. Just a quick note, and Tom, you do have a workshop at the end of the month in which we will talk about, and I guess in more detail, many of the things that we discussed in this panel, correct?
The morning of April 29th, CAP, DWR, and the Bureau of Reclamation are joining us. It's a joint workshop on these Colorado River issues. It will be streamed live. Hopefully people can attend, and you can go onto our websites, CAP and DWR, and get that link. Also, in terms of the conservation question earlier, every website of every person on this panel today will have conservation tips on it for the public, for the residents. And I would urge folks to go to those websites to look for those tips, both indoor and outdoor water use.
Thank you, Tom. Again, to our viewers and to our listeners, thank you for spending the morning with us. To our sponsors, thank you. To our panel members, thank you. And enjoy the rest of your day.